This is part of also why I'm like, I just love entrepreneurs and business people, because there often is such an internal drive to say, I'm trying something new. I'm going in a new direction. I'm not actually willing to just accept the status quo. And they're often just a little bit more interesting, right?
Are you ready to unlock the power of prayer in every aspect of your life, including the workplace? Today on Seek, Go, Create, the Leadership Journey, we welcome Amy Lykosh, the Executive Director of Workplace Prayer. She has a passion for intertwining prayer and leadership. After reconnecting with prayer and experiencing its transformative power firsthand, Amy has dedicated her life to guiding others in nurturing their spiritual journeys. From overseeing a dynamic workplace prayer movement to managing complexities of cool stuff like homeschooling and homeopathy, Amy's story is a testament to the enduring strength and guidance that prayer brings. Before I bring her on, though, I wanted to give a big thank you to some of our financial supporters here. We recently added a place where some listeners could contribute financially to what we're doing here at seekgocreate.com/support. And I want to thank Geo. Geo contributed $33, and this was the comment, said, "God bless. Thank you for your testimony, Tim. And just in the last few days, we've received anonymous tips or gifts, whatever they want to call it, of $10, $57, and $85. So I want to thank everyone for supporting us before I brought our guest on. So Amy, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction.
So, Amy, we have just met. We've got a great connector in Sabrina that connected us. I always honor and love whoever Sabrina connects me with. But let's do a little bit of a pretend. I don't know. I was trying to say where we are. Maybe an airport. We sort of bump into each other in an airport. I just recently flew this last week. And we're just chit-chatting. And, I find out you're in Virginia. You find out something. And I say, Amy, what do you do? What's your answer when someone asks you that question?
I say, I pray for businesses. And there's usually a little bit of a pause. And then people are like, wait, what? So I pray for businesses. That is my privilege, my joy, and my full-time job.
So, all right, good. That's cool, because we can kind of dive into that right away. Because my follow-up would be, okay, I'm a prayer guy. I believe in prayer. I'm also a business guy. But praying for businesses, I've never really heard that. Tell me more.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So probably the best place to start is my own journey, which my parents were on missions. They were involved with the missions movement, on staff with the missions agency in the late 1980s. And so every day they had staff meeting and they would pray. And at some point, they realized that the second reason why people went home from the mission field was because they didn't know what to do with their children for education. And so my parents thought, well, we can help with that. The number one reason was because they didn't get along with their team members. Not much you can do about that one. But in terms of educating, they said, we can help with that. So they developed a homeschool curriculum, and that did allow missionaries to stay on the field one more year. But the great thing was they thought, we really liked having prayer. And so let's do that with our own business. And so they always allowed space for the staff to come together and have morning prayer time. And so for 30 years, that was their thing. They started in 1990. And then by 2020, there were certain things that when I looked at the business, I thought, we are just not getting breakthrough. We've seen so many beautiful answers to prayer over the years, miracles, just the Lord's provision, so precious. But there were places where I just thought, if I knew better how to pray more effectively, I feel like I would have just maybe these places would get breakthrough more quickly. I felt a little bit like I was trying to water a football field with a garden hose. And I thought, I either need something more like a fireman's hose, or I need a sprinkler system, or I need some rain from heaven, but I just need something that's a little stronger. And so at that point, I went looking for people to help either teach me how to pray better. That was kind of my first option. Let me find out more how to do it effectively. But then I also thought, if there was actually somebody out there who knows more and would just pray, I would really like that too. That proved to be surprisingly difficult to find people. And so when I finally found someone, I was like, well, hallelujah, let's try this. And so my parents hired him. And the third day, I sent him a text at 11 p.m. and I said, we have had 10 answered prayers today. I could not even believe it. And it wasn't like I had sent him the list of my top 1,000. It was more just things that I had been watching for and paying attention. And so when I said that, we've had 10 answered prayers today, I was expecting a response like, that's fantastic. And instead, I got an answer back that said, let's go for a dozen. And I remember looking at my phone like, who is this person? Like, he's not content with 10. He wants a dozen. And it's 11 p.m. at night. And he clearly really believes that prayer works. And so that was my initial introduction, day 3, to Bob Perry. And by the middle of the month, I was like, I've got to do this with you. This is the most exciting thing. Because we did hit a dozen that day, and we never hit less than a dozen for the rest of the month. There were days we had 2 dozen. I mean, I truly was like, this is incredible. And I already thought that prayer worked. So it became, now I was like very, very committed to this idea.
So that is pretty awesome. I'm sitting here. This is what's going through my mind. I want to keep going down that path, but I also like to get people's background and story. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a comma right there at what you just said, and we're going to come back to that shortly. But I kind of first want to ask like a bigger picture question. And that, in your opinion,
thank you.
Why do we not spend time in prayer? I mean, for those that are believers, I mean, listen, and someone's probably gotten this far, even in this episode, it's not like they're trying to figure out, what are they talking about? No, it's probably even the title and stuff is probably going to be, okay, this has something to do with it. But what would be some reasons why we don't do this? Because what you just said, it seems like, well, why wouldn't we? But why don't we?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And it's one that I would say my mom, who founded the business, and she said at one point, she's like, Amy, I was the head of the prayer committee, or not the committee, but like the small group that met at church. She said, I did that for years. And we would meet every Wednesday, and I had my list of things I wanted to pray about. And she said, but business was never on the list. Like, I was praying for the single moms and the homeschooling moms and the children as they went off to school. And I was praying for the pastors. And like, we felt like we covered everything. But she also said, when I'm praying at the front of the church during, after service, sometimes churches have people who can come up for prayer. She said, I never had anybody come and ask me for prayer for their business except once. And he was trying to sell. And so when we bought the name for our URL, workplaceprayer.com, it was the minimum bid. And that was a gift to us, like, oh, hooray, we saved money. But there was another part of us that, like, I literally cried about this for a month because I thought, Lord, that means that nobody is looking for that. I had gone looking for a name for a reading program for the homeschool curriculum. And they're like the top 1,000 that I looked for were all taken. And so the best way I can describe it is that it feels a little bit like there's a black hole around business and prayer, that there's just actually nobody is really thinking about this. It's almost like here is this place where business owners are so precious to God's heart. They're the ones who are creating. They're not just business owners, but people who are in business. They're offering something to the world that is solving a problem, and they're creating value for people. And it's so precious. Like, this is so much a part of God's heart. And yet, I don't know if there's a part where we're just maybe a little bit embarrassed. Like, probably God doesn't really care about that. But I think for whatever reason, we just really don't think about it as something that is worthy of prayer. And so I don't know if I have a better answer for you. Then it's kind of a mystery to me too.
It's interesting. And I may not be the right guy to bring up the paradigms because I was saved in a business setting out in church world. And I've always been business guy, partially because of greed and pursuit of money. We won't get into that here. That's a whole nother story. But truthfully, I think that might be why there may not be prayer in business. We've kind of, in our first world Christian Americanized culture, we've sort of, I think, programmed people, and I'm going to say this and then you could comment. I think we've programmed people to not bring that filthy mammon talk into our church which then also says, well, probably I don't need to bring it into my prayer time. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I mean, it's interesting because obviously Jesus does say you cannot serve both God and mammon. On the other hand, when you think about it, if the Bible begins in a garden and it ends in a city, which in some ways is a lot of organized gardens, there's a lot of organization and administration and building things and creating that is necessary. And so there's an element where I'm like, no, we actually want to be praying for our cities, for our businesses, for all of the things that are producing, and that the Lord actually has solutions. So I guess one of the ways for me, maybe like this is probably one of the most deeply convicting moments that I've had as an adult. I was going to a conference and I ended up, the Uber was driving me through the streets of the Bronx at like 1 a.m. because the flight had been really delayed. And we were driving through the projects and it was just not, it was just not my favorite environment. And we passed a little strip mall and it had a bunch of, how would I put this, chain restaurants. So I don't remember what it was, but you can imagine Taco Bell or Pizza Hut or something. And I know enough about nutrition and such that I had this kind of internal reviling, like, whoa, Lord, it's not even food. And basically what the Lord said to me was, do not ever condemn those again, because there were children who went to bed with full stomachs because those exist. And there's this part where I was like, we need to actually be bringing solutions. Like the world brings solutions and it actually does feed children. But we as people who love Jesus should be solving problems that are large. And so there's an element even with that where I don't know that that's exactly answering your question, but it's like, if we could combine the beauty of business and problem solving and bring kingdom solutions, God solutions to those places, I think what an amazing transformation process.
No, I think that ties together well because it goes to something. I'll bring this up and get your thoughts on this too. I've been doing a lot of study into Middle Eastern culture that most of our scriptures and our Bible and everything comes from. And many times I wonder if we're missing it because we don't understand that culture. Because we're really products of what I call the Greco-Roman culture. And we segment and compartmentalize everything. And we judge and all that kind of stuff. But I do wonder if because we're so compartmentalized, we've compartmentalized our business life so far away from our walk with the Lord that it becomes more uncomfortable to have a conversation like you and I are having than to someone were to say, we would be shocked if they said they didn't pray for their business. You know what I mean? That would be like, if we were in the Jewish culture or the Middle Eastern culture, they would probably be wondering, why the heck are y'all having a podcast episode about praying in the workplace?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I've heard that the word in Hebrew for work is the same as for worship. And so there's such a beautiful connection, I guess, that, in the Hebrew mind, I think that would be, there's not really a divide.
Yeah, I mean, that it's all together, it's one. And I think we still try to segment off our Sunday life, our Monday life, our work, finances, and all type of things like that. And you know what? I just had this vision of Jesus in a statement that, and this is to me a business answer to probably a prayer, it's cast your nets on the other side of the boat.
Yeah.
And I just got off the phone with a client where we were talking their strategies and all, which is kind of what I do with people. And, should we cast it on this side of the net or the other side of the net? And that's could have been a direct answer to prayer. So anyway, all right. So those are some big picture things. But Amy, you've got so many things that popped up like about Amy. I'm going to mention a few and then I'm going to kind of do rapid fire and then you could respond to any of these. Homeschooling. We homeschooled our kids. They're grown. Homeschooling is obviously a big deal. If it's written on your bio, it's got to be a passion. Homeopathy. I can't show the camera right now, but I haven't taken any type of pharmaceutical in a long time. My wife, I don't understand it all, but she gives me things when I say I've got a little bit of congestion, whatever. So homeopathy is big deal for us. But probably the biggest one that was kind of like a little exclamation point at the end of your bio was that for 4.5 years, you lived in 200 and something square feet, which my wife and I, for the last 5.5, have lived in this motor coach. Tell me more about Amy.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, so I did grow up in a homeschooling family. And then, of course, my parents started the homeschooling business. Homeschooling was kind of a non-negotiable when we got married. And then, so we have 5 boys. They're not entirely grown, but my oldest is 22 and my youngest is 10. So I feel like I've been doing homeschooling for a long time and I have some years yet to go. I love homeschooling. I also love homeopathy because I also felt like when my children were young, I remember when they would get sick, the only option that I had to feed them was, like cherry syrup NyQuil. And I thought, I never give them artificial colors or flavors at all in their normal life. So why am I doing this when they're sick? And so around that time, I was probably preparing for a home birth, and the midwife said something like, homeopathy has no side effects, and you can take it from before the child is born all the way until your dying day, and it's just wonderful. And it's a little more nuanced than that. That's kind of like a very basic level understanding. But I thought, okay, that's amazing. And so I did actually go to school and get my 2-year certificate. I did not ever go through sitting for the boards. Instead, had kind of a hard right turn into prayer, even before praying for business. I felt like, oh, there's other things I'm supposed to do in the realm of prayer. But I had really asked the Lord to make me a healer. And so I thought, I'm not going to go to med school. I don't want to be that kind of a healer. So homeopathy seemed like a reasonable way to be a healer in other ways. But yeah, in terms of living in 224 square feet, we lived in a construction trailer, 8 by 28, for 4.5 years. And the story behind that is that we were very normal, very happy people living in Boulder. My husband was a forensic structural engineer, somebody who is a building doctor, basically. He would go and design repairs for that. And I was happily working with my parents and doing homeschooling. And there was a day I was walking down the street with all of my boys, probably dog on the leash around my waist. And I felt like the Lord said, go start a farm. And I was not in the habit of hearing from the Lord. That was a very unusual event. So I thought, oh, well, that was kind of unusual. Went about my day, didn't particularly think a whole lot more of it other than just like, interesting. And then my husband came home and he had been on an engineering job up in the mountains. And he walked in and he said, I think the Lord said that we're supposed to move to a farm. And I was like, oh, well, I heard that today too. So I guess we better do it. So then we ended up looking around the country for places where there was land and water, because although Boulder is very beautiful, it is also very dry and very pricey if you want land. And so we ended up settling in Central Virginia, and it was unimproved land. We opted to get as much land as possible, which I will just say, I believe that was the Lord's guidance, but it was not necessarily the easier option. And so we lived in a construction trailer for 4.5 years and tried to start a farm, anyway, we were faithful to the call. So thank you for asking.
Maybe my thought that comes to my mind is, how did that end? How did you transition? Because I don't think you're still there. What was the transition? Because you're still in Virginia, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So that's also a beautiful question. So we did not move off the land. Part of what happened is that we are both very capable, very energetic people. And so when we moved to land and everything died, not just the first year, everything died like year after year. And finally, I went to my husband. I said, I can't live under the curse this much, or this close to the curse. So in Genesis, when Adam and Eve fell, there's just a curse and things die. And I just said, emotionally, I cannot handle this. And after another year or two of kind of valiantly going on by himself, he's just not somebody who likes working alone. So he's like, okay, maybe I will be done too. So we still live on the land. I think for me, part of what that did is really press into prayer. Like, Lord, why did you call us to do that if it was all just going to fail? That wasn't very nice. And I think for my husband, he kind of got a new direction. He does still do some engineering work on the side, but he has a tree service business now that he runs with some friends and employs several of our sons. So if all that it was that the Lord moved us to Central Virginia, that would have been okay. On my birthday this year, the Lord gave me a gift. So this is now 14 years after we moved to the land. And I periodically just kind of ask him, like, that really wasn't very nice, Lord. Why did you invite us to move to land when it was really not going to be very good? And it's so funny. He said to me, hey, Amy, what was the call? And I was like, you asked us to, like, you asked me to start a farm and you told Phil to move to a farm. And Lord was like, well, did you do it? And I was like, yeah. And he was kind of like, okay. So you had it built up in your mind that it was going to be like successful farm and really profitable. And that just wasn't my invitation. So anyway, I'm very, very thankful for where we are. It was not the easiest road to get here.
I mean, yeah, some of that stuff it's hard work. I mean, my wife, we're in an RV, but yet she has a garden because where we hang out some in the summer, there's a community garden here. And I'm the laborer and I water but man, it's hard work. And it's just a little patch that's barely, I mean, I'm over to my left right here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stacks of things where she's been canning here in our RV and harvesting her crops. But it's interesting. I want to go back to something because I think this is a prayer question or a listening question or a hearing question or something like that. Isn't it interesting how we try to fill in the gaps? Yeah. You got an instruction and it seemed like it was a very clear instruction. Go live on the land, start a farm or something to that effect. But then you started filling in all the gaps of what you expected it to look like. And this is how it ends. And part of our underlying theme here is redefining success. And a lot of it goes back to that. You probably had success and your husband had success and maybe even the kids. And the way you even said it almost is like you feel as if it wasn't a success, but God's got you right where he wanted you. It's just maybe it looked a little different.
Yes, redefining success. That would be a conversation I have had with the Lord regularly because, and he's very kind, right? But there will be times where I'm like, I am an efficient person. I like things to get done. Can we please just go straight and stop all of this curving? And so we were having this conversation because I also know that just because it's the shortest distance, that sometimes if you're going up a mountain, you actually want the switchbacks. It makes it easier. And I was like, okay, I can receive that, Lord. That's fine. I'm still maybe not like the most like, I'm loving this conversation, Lord. And all of a sudden he was like, yeah, but also sometimes there are quantum leaps. And I was like, touche, yes. And so just that sense of like, you think that this is the shortest distance, but the Lord has actually sometimes these just like, I'm not going to say magical, but like things at the quantum level kind of are magical. So anyway, I like the idea of redefining success because it isn't exactly what you would always think. So, yeah.
So one would hear, and again, my lifestyle is similar. We have similar story. One might hear things like homeschool, homeopathy, living in a small space, hearing from the Lord, things like that. And they might use the word that's not very traditional or normal. They could also use the word weird. They could say that because I remember in the 90s having both my parents who were educators and we decided to homeschool. It was a very heated conversation. It sounds like you were in that environment anyway, but if someone, I'm sort of egging you a little bit. If someone were to say, yeah, that's some weird stuff, homeschooling and non-pharmaceutical homeopathy healing and prayer and business, it's like, man, you got some weird stuff going on, Amy. How? I just said it. So how do you respond to me?
Well, this is so funny that you asked me that. I was actually having a conversation with the Lord about this pretty recently also, because I was like, Lord, your servants are very odd. They're just weird people. And he said, yeah, it's true. And I said, well, does it have to be like that? At some point, can we be like just on the normal end of weird and not like super weird? I would be okay with that. And he said, the beautiful thing about people who are weird is that the beautiful thing about my followers is that they are willing to do things that most people don't. They're willing to push into new territories in different ways. And I think if you look at the scriptures, the people who were really following the Lord were not necessarily the ones who would have fit in. I think he just has a lot of pleasure in the people who are a little bit more on the fringe, we should say. But it's also, I just feel like he has such a heart of compassion really for everyone. But this is part of also why I'm like, I just love entrepreneurs and business people, because there often is such an an internal drive to say, I'm trying something new. I'm going in a new direction. I'm not actually willing to just accept the status quo. And they're often just a little bit more interesting, right? I love that sense of always after the next thing or pursuing something else that's interesting.
Again, this is from one weird to another weird. I mean,
Oh, okay.
we live in it. We live, yeah. And it's like, which then means, are we that weird if there's multiples that can talk about similar topics that we'll call it culture? The word I use is Babylon, just so you know.
Okay, that's fine.
And kingdom is another word I'll use, is where I reside or spend most of my time, even though that we're still operating in and around a Babylonian structure also. But I do sort of embrace it. And at times I wonder if I embrace it with a little bit too much glee and pride.
I would say I try not to think about me too much because that's kind of like a never ending rabbit hole. So I probably am more like, I really just want to be where the Lord has me. And I think I'm probably in a season right now where the verse that comes to mind again and again, speaking of Babylon, is when Jeremiah writes to the early exiles, because in the book of Jeremiah, the Babylonians come and kind of take away the cream of the crop, but they leave some semblance of a structure. And then foolishly, they rebel. And then the Babylonians are like, your time is done. And they wipe everybody out. But in that interim period, the people who had already been carried off to Babylon were kind of like, why are we here? We want to go back to Jerusalem. That's where our home is. And Jeremiah writes to them and he was like, no, like you're going to be there a while. Stay there, settle down, plant your fields and crops. And then he says, pray for the peace of the city. And the word peace, it's the word shalom. So it's like, pray for the well-being, pray for the wholeness of the city. Because in its peace, in its wholeness, in its well-being, you find your peace, your wholeness, or your well-being. And so for me, that sits really well because it allows me to be like, kind of like the people of Judah who were carried into captivity and are living in Babylon. They get to be the odd ones, but they're not hating on the Babylonians. They're not like, these are awful people, stay away. It's like, no, I'm actually wanting really good things for you too. So I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but I would say that for me is the helpful place of both being in the Babylonian culture, but also saying, but I get to march to my own drummer.
The reason I love that response is that the Lord was speaking something similar to me a few days ago in my quiet time out behind the RV. We've got a sitting area out back, and I'll go out early in the morning. And like we're apt to do, we'll ask questions like, Lord, what would you have me to do today? Different things like that. Mm-hmm. And I felt as if this was the way it was worded to me, and it sounds similar to what you said, was that you are pursuing after my peace. And
Mm-hmm.
and I've been exposed recently. There's a lot of new clients and businesses that I'm going in, by the way. And I'm an engineer from Georgia Tech, so maybe it helps. I don't know. And I felt that the Lord said, you're going into places and you're bringing my peace. And I received that. I don't understand totally. And I know that I'm supposed to go in and, maybe pray more is what I'm probably going to be learning in this conversation or introducing prayer more. And so that really leads to a couple of things before we kind of go deep into how are you praying within businesses. And you notice I continue teasing people that we're going to probably do that towards the end here. I have noticed that I have a personality that I don't want to say it makes it difficult for me to pray. That doesn't sound good. But I'm wired to be an entrepreneur. I'm a business guy. And usually go is my mode. There's a reason that we're titled Seek, Go, Create. There's a reason for that. Do you find that a lot of people, I don't want to say they aren't wired to just sit down and be quiet and still and commune or talk or listen or whatever? Tell me more about that. And then I'm going to go ahead and telegraph my follow-up question is, how have you developed that, or have you always been that way? So however you want to
Oh,
address
I love
that,
it.
that's where I'd like for us to go for a few minutes.
So, first of all, you're not odd. I was reading C. Peter Wagner's book, Prayer Shield. And C. Peter Wagner, he was a professor, I think he was at Fuller in Southern California. And he basically studied how people prayed. And what he found was that in any given church body, somewhere between 5 and 10% were the praying people. And everybody else was just kind of like normal people. And then he did a survey of, like how many minutes a day do you pray? I think maybe he just surveyed pastors, actually. So it could be like the highest level of holiness here, said very tongue in cheek. But basically, most of the people were like maybe 18 minutes was kind of the average, and which meant that there were some people who were praying longer and a lot who were not praying even 18 minutes. And basically what he said was, he made a very beautiful argument for why prayer or intercession is probably one of the gifts of the Spirit. His basic argument was, because Paul has a list of different spiritual gifts in different locations in the scriptures, and they don't always overlap, and they're kind of some places there is some overlap and there is not. It was kind of like there's just gifts. And so prayer certainly could be one of the gifts of the Spirit. So if you're not willing to go there, that is extra scriptural. So you don't have to follow Peter Wagner in that line of thought. But basically, he was like, we don't try to make everybody be pastors. There is a pastoral gift. And so then to say, well, if there's a prayer gift, it doesn't mean that we don't all pray. Just like if a pastor's thing is to shepherd and guide, like we are as parents, we want to be shepherding and guiding and pastoring in that way our children. But it doesn't mean that that's our role in the larger body of Christ. Just like, there's some people, evangelists, they will go and like the sty cap who's helping them with their luggage, like they lead them to the Lord. It takes them 15 seconds. And you're like, well, that would be amazing. That just isn't my gift. And so to be able to say, you know what? It doesn't mean that we don't ever talk about our faith. It just means we don't have the gift of evangelism. So with prayer, I feel like, oh no, like we should pray. We should talk to the Lord. That's part of what we're supposed to do. But to say, I just actually don't feel compelled to spend an hour with him every day, that like, please be at peace with that. That's actually pretty normal. And yeah, it was for me as a prayer person, like an hour a day by myself is kind of my minimum. If I don't get that, I start to get a little bit edgy. It was hilarious to me to read C. Peter Wagner's description of his first time trying to pray for an hour, where it was like, I was really in it as deeply as I could be. And then, he maybe even said that it was like worse than watching his wife in labor, just like, woe is me. This is really, really hard. So I guess anybody who finds it difficult to pray, especially for a long time, just be at peace. So that's the first thing. And then you also asked, how did I develop my own prayer capability? And that's a really beautiful question. I would say there's a very long backstory because I did step away from prayer for 8 years because it completely freaked me out. But once the Lord called me back to prayer, I basically just said, my goal is to pray more this month than last month. And so if I was praying, a few minutes a day, then I wanted to just pray like a few more minutes a day. And then at some point, I kind of just like fell into the pool and was like, well, here I just am. But it really started with just saying, I'm going to be intentional and just start slow and a little bit and be okay with even a little bit and not beat myself up that it's not an hour, that I'm not on a silent retreat all day like I was a nun. Like, that's okay.
Well, what's interesting about it, there's a name that came to my mind, John Michael Talbot, that we interviewed a number of months
Oh, I
back.
saw that.
Yeah, and he's not a monk, but he lives a monastic life is what he talks about. And he just literally, slight exaggeration, but he talked about just being days in prayer. And I appreciated it. I just couldn't quite imagine it. I mean, he invited me. He said, hey, you got your RV, come hang out with us here at our place here. And, you could, join up and everything. I'm like going, yeah, okay. Like, it's a beautiful conversation just about being still and quiet for long periods of time. One more sort of background-ish question, Amy. You'd mentioned kind of missionary growing up. You had mentioned, I think your parents had business and all of that. When were you, I'm trying to think of exactly how I want to drill down on this question. When did you become aware of you mentioned it at the beginning, but give me an age or a situation or something that you sort of became aware of, like, okay, there's something bigger than me. And you know, I joke with people, you weren't saved at birth because you were a missionary, were you? It's bad theology, by the way. I'm not.
It is bad theology. It's true. So because I did grow up in a very beautiful, godly family, I guess for me, what I would say is when I was 5, I went up to the upper bunk and I just laid on the bunk and said, God, I can't do it by myself anymore. Please help. And so for me, that was kind of my moment, I guess, of coming to the Lord. But of course, the walk with God is not ever a moment. That's the beginning. And then you just walk with the Lord. So I've had very beautiful mentors along the way who've helped guide and shape and inform my life. I guess I feel like the fact that I even thought to ask that at 5 shows that I had some awareness.
The thing that I like about that response, I know that there are people that have an event, but I look at life more as a process. Maybe it's my engineering.
Right.
I don't know. It's just like there's a process, and we're going through this process for our time here. And it's got moments, it's got maybe some stops and starts and forward and backwards and things like that. As we were talking about prayer, the word intercessor came to mind. And I served on the board of a ministry, I actually still do, that for a season, this ministry had some intercessors. And weekly, there was an email that went to the intercessors to be praying for this or doing that. So as we kind of move back towards the business conversation, tell me if there's a difference, if that's just nomenclature. How does intercessor fit in with the conversation that we're having here about prayer? And then in a little moment, in a moment, prayer in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the challenge of prayer is that I don't feel like the church necessarily has a super great definition of even what it is. And so that's been a big part of my journey for the last 6 years, is saying, like, what am I even talking about here? And then you add on a word like intercessor, which is like about as churchy of a word as you could possibly get. And so, yes, big sigh here. But okay, so the beautiful thing of what you just shared about the organization with which you're on the board, where they had people who would pray and you would send out emails. To me, I would describe that as a prayer shield. They're serving as, like, we are praying for this organization or for the needs of this organization, as it, like, we are locking our shields together in order to offer protection. In many ways, that's what I would say that's how we seek to serve for our clients, that we are a prayer shield, that they don't have to try to go out and find the intercessors or find the people of prayer to do that on their behalf. It's like, no, we've been trained, this is what we do, and we love it. So it kind of like, we're the people who are like signing up, like, we're praying for an hour a day just because we love it. Let us do that for you. So that would be just a little side note. But an intercessor, by definition, an intercessor is somebody who's standing in the gap. And so an advocate is another word that we sometimes can see, or is a synonym when you look at the definition. And so if you think about legally, the advocate is like the lawyer who's arguing the case between the person who's guilty or hopefully not guilty and the judge. And then in the realm of prayer, the intercessor is the one who's like, hey, I can see that there is stability in heaven and that there's shakiness on earth. And I want to bring that stability of heaven to the shakiness of earth. I want to stand there in the gap and say, hey, God, are you looking at this situation? We need you to come and change this situation. So it's just basically somebody who's there to pray on behalf of somebody else. So we do plenty of prayer there's a whole bunch of different ways of praying. So that's not the only form of prayer that we do, but I would define intercession as specifically that kind of standing in the gap where you're not asking for yourself, you're asking on somebody else's behalf.
Right. So this is going to back up to the things you said at the beginning. At some point, you became connected to what is called now workplace prayer. And I think you mentioned, Bob, that was maybe already doing something. Somewhere I saw Perry Marshall's name, and Perry Marshall.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, Perry was a guest on our podcast back in, I actually pulled it up before this, August of 2020, August 10th, for anybody who wants to circle back. And Perry and I have interacted with each other. I mean, not always in a strong way, but like 20 years ago, he came to my home back in Georgia. And also, yeah, I'm
Oh,
familiar with Perry and his memos from the main home office and
head office.
yeah, things like that. Let's go back, or let's start and talk about kind of how, again, you got involved with what we're calling workplace prayer, and give any of the background or origins of the organization that you feel like you need to, so someone can kind of understand that.
So I felt like the Lord called me out of my mostly prayerless state in July of 2018. And that was when I started saying, like, I'm just going to pray a little bit more and a little bit more. And then in March of 2019, I was driving up to drop off my homeopathy final, getting ready to keep going. And I felt like Lord said, start a prayer challenge. And I was like, okay, like that's kind of like an email sequence where you can get emails about prayer. So I went and for probably 6 months, I researched all of the materials that I already had on prayer, trying to find basically what it ended up being single sentence prayers to pray as you go about your day. And I was like, that's awesome. Let's get these out there. That will be great. And so I launched it. And the first round, I had 5 people go through. It was my mom, my sister, one friend, and 2 people I bribed. And every one of them sent me beautiful messages at some point in the next 21 days where they were like, this is actually changing my life, which that's fantastic. But then there's like that weeping of like, more Lord. And so I met Perry Marshall. I went to an event of his in September of 2019, and I had a question for him. I mean, I was there this was like a over dinner asking it, after hours kind of question. And so I said, how do I market something as unpopular as prayer? And he had this amazing off the cuff, hilarious response because this is the kind of person he is. But his more serious answer was, find somebody to pray for your business. And I was like, well, that is a non-traditional, very out of the box thing to ask about. So that's when I actually started looking for prayer. So it was kind of, yes, it was for my parents' business, but it was also for my own business. And so Bob Perry had been praying for businesses for maybe a few months at that point, and it took me a while. So I didn't actually meet him until May of 2020. And then he started praying for my parents' business and just like our family and such in June of 2020. And it was kind of midway through the month where I was like, I want to join you. This needs to be bigger. Partially, I had been looking for prayer coverage for 9 months. Like, I just am wanting this so much. And so when I finally found somebody who not only was willing, but who was actually super good at it, I was like, everybody in the world should want this. Let's do this. And so when I found out it was just him, I was like, well, no, I have administrative giftings. I am very passionate about this. I have a lot of energy. Like, let's go for it. I don't actually even remember what the name of his business was. It was not as memorable as Workplace Prayer. So we formed Workplace Prayer together. And then it was actually right around 4 years ago, Labor Day weekend of 2020, we had enough. We actually got one big client who was enough for me to step away from working as I had been. So yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, very good. So I want to go down that path, but there's one thing I want to kind of connect a dot. You've mentioned your parents' business a few times. Give me just a real quick. So, and you mentioned in homeschool, I believe, is that still exist? Tell me about it. Cause it seems like it's not a small operation. Am I picking up on something there?
Oh, that's true. So they started Sunlight Curriculum, which is a literature rich homeschool company. And so, yeah, it is definitely still around. Very thankful for that because that's how we educate our own children. So a lot of books. And so, yeah, I love Sunlight.
Very good. And you've been associated, you've done some stuff for that organization. Are you still associated?
Yeah. So no, I worked very happily with them from the time I graduated. I mean, summers and part-time at different times, but no, I mean, from 2001, when I graduated from college up until 2020, and I truly never thought I would leave. I loved working with them and, family business. It's very fun. So having a shift to praying for business was a very hard right turn in my life.
Family business is fun. That's one word. There's a lot of challenges with in family businesses.
It is true. I read children's books as part of my job. Like, that's pretty amazing.
Oh my gosh. That's like one of these jobs like testing chocolate.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
It's like,
this is what I know. So for me to change away and do prayer, it was truly like, Wow. Did not see that one coming.
So thank you for allowing me to backtrack slightly.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I've actually heard of that company. So that's awesome. Yeah. All right. So you started and you mentioned this. So I'm going to go here now. That is that you started the business of workplace prayer and you got a client that allowed you to leave your job. So all of that implies that there is money changing hands.
It's true.
Is that an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement, indeed.
All right. Tell me more about how that works.
Well, so practically, we pretty much just say, if you would like to partner with us, we can figure out how to make that happen. So this is not like we want to price gouge or anything else. I guess, I don't think though you were just asking practically. I think there's probably like ethically, how do you handle that?
I'm going to see how far you go, and I may dig a little more.
Okay.
You go as far as you want. I'll see if it satisfies me.
Right. Oh, perfect. Okay. So basically, when I was asking people to pray for me, for my business, I had said, like, I would really like to hire you to do this. And the first response I got was, the scripture says, freely you've received, freely give. I'm really not comfortable with that. My parents have been paying their staff on the clock for 30 years to pray for their business. And the Lord has completely blessed it. It was not, and part of that, for them, it was an ethical issue. Like, we're asking our employees to come in and spend some of their time. Why would we ask them to volunteer? Like, first of all, they might volunteer for a week, but this is not going to be something ongoing. Like, I'm asking them to pray for my benefit. Let me actually compensate them for their time. And one of my friends said something like, we're not asking people to pay for the gift. Like, the gift of God is the gift of God, but this is actually what we do in order to live. And so there is financially that actually just makes sense. But as I also thought even about that passage, freely you've received, freely give, that's in the context of Jesus sending out his disciples in order to go and spread the good news. And so part of the instructions when they went out is he said, when you go into somebody's house, stay with them as long as they're willing to host you, and then bless them. And I was thinking about this because I was like, okay, so they're getting lodging and food. So they're getting their needs are being supplied. If you are traveling, that would be like your hotel and your restaurant meals, or just, as a person, it's going to be your mortgage and your food, your bills. But then what they were offering, I was like, do I think that a blessing from the disciples who had walked with Jesus would be more valuable than the cost of like sharing a bed and giving them some food? And it was kind of like a no-brainer, like, of course that's going to be more valuable. So even the idea of freely you've received, freely give, there is on some level, even though it would not have necessarily been like, here's some coins, there is an exchange of value that's happening. So in that passage, exchange of value. It also kind of blows my mind. When you look in the Old Testament, I realize that Old Testament prophecy is not going to be exactly the same as like now in current day paying for prayer, but there is at least a bit of a correlation, because when Saul's donkeys had gone missing, he was like, okay, where can we find the donkeys? He and his servant had looked all over. And then they're like, well, we're getting close to the community where Samuel lives. And Saul was like, well, we can't go to him because I don't have any money. And his servant was like, well, I have some money. We can go and get a prophetic word from Samuel. So there actually is, like, in the scriptures, there's at least a little hint that people, in order to get prophetic words from Samuel, just like paid him some money. So that's maybe a little bit unexpected. I would say, as a modern evangelical, probably part of the reason why paying for prayer can be a little bit dicey is we can think about Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. And part of the challenge of that entire era of Christian history is that you had the Catholics who are kind of like, I'm going to just sell you some indulgences. So I think we have this kind of like paying for prayer is like deeply embedded in our ethics and our mindset, sort of like, well, we don't want that. And so I would agree with that. You don't actually get to buy your way out of sin. That was covered by the blood of Jesus. So whatever you want to pay from an indulgence standpoint, that's not actually going to work. But I do think that just saying, no, I would like to pay for just the time that is spent. We recognize that this is the thing. We pay our janitors at the church, we pay our pastors, and part of pastoral care is usually praying for the people if they're in the hospital, or praying during a sermon. No, we're not like, well, that part of your sermon, we're going to make sure that we don't cover that one. That would be nonsensical. So, okay, that would be my initial answer.
All of that is extremely valuable. As you were talking, I'm just sitting here going, at the heart, I call myself a coach. I believe that's what I was created for, coaching. And there are times that I'll communicate and interact with people, and there will not be any, we'll call it a transaction. But then there are other times that I do it. And I mean, I've been working with organizations for a long period of time, and there's money that changes hands. And part of the thing that I have told people before is like, do you want to just interact with me from time to time, or do you want dedicated? Do you want a sliver of my time that's dedicated to you? Because I do think that there's something that goes with that. And I sort of think of this in the same way. Would that be a way to think about it if I'm like business owners? Like, I want Amy blank dedicated per week, per month, or whatever. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So that's one of the ways that Bob talks about it, where he said, everybody would love to have prayer, right? Like, everybody would like that. How do we know where the Lord is even inviting us to focus our attention in this season? And part of that is like, the people who are willing to say, like, I would be happy to partner with you financially. So it allows us actually to focus in a little bit on where are we even supposed to be focusing? So yes, that's a huge part of it. It's also just like one of our clients and friends, he's like, no, you want the person who spent the time and figured out how to do it and put in their 10,000 hours. That's the person you want praying for you. So let's bless the person who has actually spent that time and allow them to do what they're excellent at doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm guessing there's some skills, there's some muscle. Sister Susie, she prays loud at church. I don't think I want her necessarily coming in my business and, casting out, plucking up, throwing things around, running around maybe, I don't know. But I'm guessing there's a skill set. There's probably some knowing how to handle things within a business setting that's important. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So part of what I really appreciate that Bob brought from the very beginning, because at this point, Bob and I are the only ones who are full-time in the business, but we have a team of over 20 at this point. So we have people who pray for at least an hour a day. Bob and I pray together over the phone every day as well. And so there's like multiple levels of prayer, but we also have a prophetic team. So we have a lot of people who work with us who also help to carry the businesses in prayer. And so part of that is just saying we value all of this and we want to release that more into the businesses.
All right. I'm sitting here watching time going, man, there's a couple of things I'd really love to go deeper in, but there's at least a few things I want us to get in before we finish up. The first thing is I would like for you to tell me what an engagement might look like. And if there's geography involved, y'all do it virtually. What practically does it look like? And I did look around at how much you charge, and it sounds like y'all just do it by proposal, and there's some discussion there. But give me a practical, and then I've got another question before we might wrap up.
Okay. So practically, we recognize that people are busy. So our ideal is when people partner with us, we send them an intake form and we're like, what is it that you would like prayer for? And then our clients are welcome to update as often as possible. So I'm personally a client, so I make sure that I'm emailing every week. I'm like, these are the requests that I have. These are the praises that I had last week. But a lot of our clients don't do that. In fact, we've had clients who have never actually submitted an intake form, but we ask them and they're like, no, we're seeing answers. There's a sense of like somebody has our back, which I think is fantastic. We do have corporate calls that we do twice a week. Initially had that just for our team. We call them advocates, our advocate team. But then after a while, our clients were kind of like, we want more. And so now we have any clients who want to be on. It's not a requirement, but it's more like Bob especially has trained for over 40 years and really how to be excellent in prayer. And so it's almost, I view it as a tremendous privilege to be able to be on a call with him and hear what he's thinking and hear how he's praying. And he has a very simple format that he invites that is very easy. Any people for their first time can come on and feel like, I can pray, maybe not with complete confidence, but at least somewhat confident. And then depending on what level people partner with us, they get a monthly prophetic word, because ideally we think about that as like our business owners are like the kings. If we could be serving more like priests, but then the prophets are important too. So kind of just like David at the height of his kingdom, his ideal was when he had prophet, priest, king all working together. So practically, I guess that's probably the basics there.
Very good. And then the other, this is going to be an extremely crass question, but business people love ROI. So
Okay.
I'm not going to ask an ROI question, but I'm going to ask maybe just for a story or two that might be, I don't know, success or a result. And some of this you may or may not be able to share details. Give me an example of how this has played out.
Yeah. So I would say, I would love to be able to say like every client we've ever prayed for has an amazing ROI. That would not be true. And so really what we say is like, we pray and we are faithful in prayer. And then like, that's all that we can guarantee, obviously. A couple of favorite stories. One of our clients is in real estate and he had a deal that was about to go through and then it completely died, like completely died. And he was like, what just happened? So we prayed about it. And not only did the Lord resurrect the deal, which truly, like it literally was like a resurrection, but then it also closed in a week, which was way faster than anybody had been thinking. And what was going to be, I think it was going to be a $125,000 tax bill. At the last minute, somebody found this tremendous loophole and saved them $85,000. So, it's kind of like, well, that would pay our fee for like many, many years, maybe decades. So hallelujah for that. That's fantastic. But then another one of this is probably for me, one of my favorites, just because it's so outside the box. One of our clients had a large scale organic farm. And so they, with our own farming experience, not large scale, but small. But there was a day I was down praying and I was like, Lord, I know that there are issues. Anytime there's heavy equipment, there's just things can happen. And I probably recorded a message for our clients like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about you right now. This is what I'm praying for. Sent it off. Didn't really think much of it because again, if you're farming, it's kind of like every day you're using big equipment. It just is a thing. Well, I found out later that day, maybe even around that time, their very beloved farm manager, who is amazing, he had been somehow working with the potato digger and got caught in the chain and was being pulled like where his body was off the ground. And people, like some of the other staff were watching this, like there were witnesses to this. And he said, and then somehow I came loose and it should have taken my head off, which is like literally he should have had a very gruesome death, but he didn't. And so the farm is not only preserved of the trauma of losing an employee, but also a very critical employee. And so that's not really like a specific ROI, but that's maybe more like it was a person. A person is still alive on this earth. That's very awesome.
Yeah, I think what it tells me is that ROI is not always a spreadsheet or a financial return there. Amy, if someone wants more, if they want more information or they want to ask questions or they want to check up on you or find out more, tell people where to go. Give them website or wherever they need to connect with you. And what we'll do is we will make sure we include all that down in the notes. So where does someone need to go?
Oh, so just workplaceprayer.com would be fantastic. That's going to be the easiest. If you want to get the 21-day single sentence prayers to pray as you go about your day, that is available. It's at praybig.me/refresh because it was the prayer refresh. So praybig.me/refresh.
Excellent. And that's where someone would go if they just want to get more information. All right, great. We are Seek, Go, Create, Amy. Those three words. So with my final question here, I'm going to allow you to pick one of those, seek, go, or create. Which one do you choose and why?
Oh, thank you. So I love the word create because as a writer, primarily, I started journaling about my experience living on the land. And then at this point, I just try to write some every day if I'm not traveling. So creating, answering questions, trying to really figure out what it is that I'm thinking, mostly in the realm of prayer, but sometimes in other directions as well. I just think the Lord is a creator God. And so we get to partner with him in creativity because we are made in his image.
Amy, thank you. Man, what a great conversation. I've loved all this weird stuff we've talked about. And I think it's been a lot of fun. Make sure if you've listened in and you're just intrigued or concerned or whatever it is, just go check it out. I've got the website pulled up here, workplaceprayer.com, and make sure you go check that out. I appreciate this conversation. We have here at Seek Go Create new episodes every Monday. We're on YouTube. We're on all the platforms. Continue listening in, commenting. I'd love to hear some comments on this conversation. Comment and share and do all that you can to help us get the word out. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.